Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants Hangout. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I will be your host for today. Really excited for today's hangout. Being a big ocean fan myself and a scuba diver, I love when we get a chance to hang out with marine biologists and find out all about their exciting work. So really excited today to be joined by Dr. Shannon Obradovich. So Shannon is a biologist with Fisheries and Oceans Canada in the Pacific Biological Station in British Columbia, Canada. Her job as part of a team of scientists is to investigate changes in the number of submarine fish and invertebrates in Canada's oceans, and then to predict what might happen to them in the future due to fishing and changes in the environment. So Shannon's research in both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Her work is used by fisheries managers to decide how many marine fish and invertebrates can be caught, and we really want to make sure that we do have fish in our ocean in the future. So Shannon, thank you so much for hanging out with us. We're really excited to learn a little bit more about your work, and I know the classrooms are going to have lots of questions who have joined us today.
Great, thanks for having me, and welcome to my office, everybody. I'm talking to you from the Pacific Biological Station in Nanaimo, British Columbia on Vancouver Island. So if you learned where the capital of British Columbia, Victoria is, I'm about 2 hours drive north of that on Vancouver Island. And this is the big concentration of fisheries scientists for the federal government in the Pacific are located here. So today I'm just going to share my screen with you because I have a short presentation. Okay. So hopefully everybody can see. Oh. Okay, everybody can see a full screen view of this now. Yes?
We are full screen, good to go.
All right. Okay, so today I've titled my talk, Exploring by the Seat of Your Rain Pants instead of just your pants, because as a marine biologist for the Canadian government and Fisheries and Oceans Canada, I think that sometimes when people think about what it means to be a scientist, they think about somebody that wears a lab coat and might be working in a lab. And while some scientists that work for Fisheries and Oceans Canada have lab coats, some don't, actually a lot don't. And I'm one of the ones that does my exploring of the marine environment wearing rain gear all the time, or I'm at my computer. So my research takes me out of my office and onto ships in the ocean. And here's some pictures of me over the years working with fish, doing research out on the ocean. And I've been working in my current job for Fisheries and Oceans Canada for just over a year, but these pictures span about 15 years of my life where I've been out doing research on different groundfish being fish that live close to the bottom of the ocean. And some of these are from when I was a student in university. So my very first job for Fisheries and Oceans Canada was as a student when I was 21, and I came and worked for the government, and that gave me the opportunity to see that I actually really liked doing this kind of work, and encouraged me to keep going back to school. So some of these pictures, like this picture is from when I was doing my master's degree, which is the upper right-hand corner, when I was in Newfoundland. So I studied Capelin and Atlantic Cod. And some of these other ones are from my PhD here in the Pacific, or my doctorate, when I was studying rockfish. And so, but when I think back, my interest in fish and fisheries started when I was really young. My dad was a grade 4, 5, 6 school teacher here in British Columbia. And he used to take us out to see the salmon spawning, and he would take his classes out to the rivers in the fall when the salmon are coming back to lay eggs. And so I had an interest really early on about just, the environment and fish. And so I just kept pursuing that and had a lot of great mentors, people that encouraged me to keep getting more education in fishery science. And I really like problem solving. And so I ended up in fishery science in a particular field called stock assessment. And that's why I ended up out in the field collecting data on fish. And why do we actually do this? Well, do you like to eat sushi or fish and chips? or maybe you like to go fishing, or maybe you just like seeing things that eat fish like whales or seals. So this kind of work supports having fish in the ocean and supports us being able to catch fish, because we're providing the scientific advice to the managers that make decisions about how many fish can be caught in the next year. So fisheries stock assessment, which is the particular field that I do, is just a really fancy way of saying fish math. It's basically changes in the number of fish over time, and we use math to represent these changes. So I think the easiest way to think about this is if we build our own mathematical model that represents the real world, and then we can use that to predict over time what will happen and provide the advice to fisheries managers. So let's imagine that this is the ocean. This is our model of the real world right now. It's not a very nice day on our ocean. There's no sun shining. Maybe it's a bit foggy. And let's imagine that there's some fish in our ocean. In fact, we have exactly 8 fish, if you count them. So let's imagine that every year, every one of our 8 fish has 2 baby fish, right? So now in our ocean, our fish math says, well, there's 8 fish plus 16 new fish. So we have 24 fish in the ocean this year. But, you know, we have fish being born, but fish are also going to die. They're going to die due to natural reasons, which might include things like bears, or you can think of eagles or killer whales, or, you know, anything in the ocean that might be eating our fish. I just picked a bear because that was easier for me to draw. And so, you know, every year our bear is going to eat a certain number of fish. In our view of the world that we're drawing, we're going to say that our bear eats 2 fish, right? So that means that in a year, we might have had 24 fish total, but we lost some to natural causes of death. In addition, you know, the whole thing of my job is driven by the fact that we want to fish on these fish. And so, you know, let's say our fishermen take 6 fish, right? So at the end of the year, we have 16 fish left in our ocean. So if we repeated this over and over, you know, if we assume that every fish has 2 baby fish every year our 2 fish died in natural causes, and every year we take 6 fish out of the ocean, and we do this for 10 or 20 years, we can start to think about how many fish will there be in 10 or 20 years? How many fish can we take out of the ocean? What happens if we want to take 18 fish instead of just 6, right? How many fish will that leave in the ocean in 50 years? So we can do this prediction, right, using our mathematical models into the future. So we can do those predictions, and then we can provide that advice to managers, and they can make a decision about how many fish we can take out of the ocean. So it seems pretty simple, right? If we look at our view of the world, it's just a number of fish in a year plus a number of fish that are born minus the deaths. That'll tell us how many fish are there next year. But wait, how do we actually know that there are 8 fish in the ocean, right? If I asked you to go out and count the trees in the forest, right, it might seem like, sure, that would be a pretty easy thing to do. But imagine that you have to count those trees while wearing a blindfold. Then it's not so easy, right? So think about trying to figure out how many fish are in the ocean. So this is a big part of the information required for stock assessment. And there are several ways that we do this. So here I'm showing some pictures of different types of ways that we estimate how many fish are in the ocean. On the right-hand side here, you can see a remotely operated vehicle, and that's basically an underwater camera that we can drive around from the ship, and we get video that we can use to count how many fish are underwater. In the upper right-hand corner here, this is a picture of a diver doing an underwater dive survey for Northern Abalone. And you can see that the diver is measuring those abalone underwater. So again, these are ones where we can directly see the fish. Another option, of course, is for us to do fishing. So this is a picture of a bottom trawl net, and that we would drag along the bottom of the ocean to see what we could catch. And the special things about bottom trawls is that we know exactly how much space that the net is going over while we're fishing. So we can use that to calculate out over the entire area of the ocean bottom and say there's probably this many fish out there. So I'm going to go out of here for a second, and I'm going to show you a video of a bottom trawl this is a DFO video from the DFO multi-species survey, which occurred on in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and this was put together by Fisheries and Oceans Canada's communications team. So let's see, here you go. So what we're seeing here is we're seeing the trawl net come back onto the ship, all right? And once it comes on in the net, then this is a Canadian Coast Guard ship, and they are going to empty the net down into the lab. And then the scientists are down below decks. The scientists actually live on the boat for maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks at a time. And so what they do is this catch comes down to them, and they sort out all the different species of fish. And here, this catch is mostly, I think, Atlantic herring. And then they're going to weigh all the different things that were caught. They're going to take measurements on things like length. And then, with fish, we cut them open so we can figure out if they're male or if they're females. We can take their stomachs to have an understanding of what those fish might have been eating. Here, this person is collecting what are called the otoliths. So those are kind of bones in the ears of the fish. And we use those to tell how old the fish are. And altogether, this is helping us estimate the population. So if I go back to here. Right. Right. So as I mentioned, when we bring the fish when we're fishing to estimate numbers, we have the ability to bring the fish onto the boat so we can do things like weigh them and measure them. But when we use underwater techniques like camera methods and such, we don't have the ability to measure them. But if we only have the fish on board the boat, we can't actually see what was in the water. So that leads to questions of like, how many of our fish are in the water are we actually catching? Are we always catching the same proportion of fish that are in the water? Like if there's 8, do we always catch 2 of those 8? Do sometimes we catch 3 for different reasons? So this leads into some of the research that I did for my PhD. And what I'm going to show you now, this is a video from that remotely operated vehicle. And this was done with Fisheries and Oceans Canada here in the Pacific. And so this is longline fishing, which is one way that we use to fish for reef species, rockfish, where you can see here there's what's called a tiger rockfish. So in the center of the screen, you see the long line, which is weighted so that it can sit on the bottom. And then we have hooks coming off them with squid bait. Right. And so what we're doing here is we're looking at what the long line is catching, but also what's swimming around the long line. So there's a yellow eye rockfish on the hook, but you can see that there are different fish swimming around that we haven't been able to catch with the long line. And the long line differs from trawl because, fish have to actually make a choice to be caught, right? With a trawl, they might just be caught up in the net, but with a long line, they have to actually bite that bait. And so, this is some more video from Fisheries and Oceans where, here we have a piece of bait, but we have several fish around it and none of them are on the bait, right? So that could be an issue of like, why aren't we catching these fish? And also sometimes maybe we didn't put the gear in the right place. So we end up maybe catching species that we weren't trying to catch. In this case, we're fishing for rockfish species, but we're catching spiny dogfish. And in some cases, we're catching these starfish, which are eating the bait as well. So we have what's called competition for these baited hooks. Sorry about that. Right. So now our view of the world is becoming more and more complex in our model, right? Not only do we have the fish that we were interested in finding out how many there are, but we also have other species of fish, and we also have, we had different species like the sharks, which are all trying to get that bait. So that changes our interpretation of what we actually catch on the boat. One of the other questions that I had in my research was what happens, for example, when a hook comes back on the deck of the vessel and on the ship, and we don't see anything on it. There's no bait anymore, but there's no fish. So we have to take a guess at what might have eaten that bait, right? So using the underwater camera, we're able to see kind of different things and competition from species that we couldn't see on the deck of the boat. So in this case, we have a giant Pacific octopus, and if you see right here, popping out from under him, you can see the empty hook. So this is a species that we hardly ever actually see, caught on the line coming up to the vessel. Here's another example of a starfish, for example, competing and getting onto the hooks. And a lot of these starfish don't make it up to the ship either. A lot of them fall off while we're pulling the longline gear back to the ship. And here's an example of a lot of box crabs that are on the bait there. And on this particular experiment, we didn't catch any of those. I didn't see a single one on the ship. So these are kind of hidden interactions happening underwater. Okay, so now our worldview is getting more and more complex, right? In terms of not only do we have our fish, we have all these different species. We have things underwater like starfish and octopus and crabs that might be eating the bait, and we're not even seeing those. And so that's kind of one of the cool things about the job is there's always new problems, right? In terms of like, well, how do we deal with the fact that all of these unintended species are things that we're catching? And there's all kinds of other questions that we have. So my research, we were just talking about what happens when what we catch on the ship doesn't necessarily represent what's in the water. And we could think about questions for any area of our model, right? Do every year the fish have exactly 2 babies? Does that change over time? What's the impact of increasing ocean temperatures on how many babies that a fish could have? Do our bears and killer whales and our natural sources of death always kill 2 fish every year? And even in the fishing industry, do we have really good records of what's happening in the water, right? And how many fish are being cut? So all of these are things that we call uncertainty, which means we don't know necessarily exactly the right answer. We don't know that there's exactly 8 fish, right? There's some uncertainty about that. And so we're developing new tools and models to help us deal with basically what we don't know. So I spent a lot of time studying yellow eye rockfish, which is, obviously this yellowy orangey fish here. And right now I'm working on Northern Abalone, which is an endangered species here in British Columbia. And the really cool thing is that, all the tools that I've spent time learning and I used on rockfish can also be applied to Northern Abalone. So learning fisheries stock assessment means that you have a lot of different mathematical tools that you can apply to a lot of different problems and a lot of different situations. And so you can have new questions come up and think about what's the way to answer this question. In addition, a lot of my job is spent working with other people. So I know I showed you a lot of pictures where I was on a boat or underwater video, but then we have to come back to our office and we have to actually work on the math and the models and writing these things up. But one of the great things is that there's a lot of scientists employed in the government that do a lot of different jobs and have different expertise, and we can all work together and share tools to solve these problems because everyone has like a similar interest and goal. So one of the things I really like about my job is that the science that I do is directly affecting the management of fisheries in Canada, and right now the management of an endangered species. I can contribute to how we understand the impacts of oil spills or climate change, and the science advice that I provide to managers is going to directly be used by them to ensure that we have fish for the future, fish that, you can eat, fish that might be important to some groups for social or ceremonial uses, fish for the whales and birds that we want to see, right? So, you know, I know that I'm having an impact on ensuring that there are fish for the future. Okay, and just if you want more information on Fisheries and Oceans Canada or science and research in Fisheries and Oceans Canada, here's a couple links that you could go to. All right. Okay, and I'm gonna give it back to you. All right, how do I end the screen share?
Just push the green button again, Shannon, that'll bring you back.
Perfect. Okay.
All right, you're back.
There we go.
All right. Well, Shannon, thanks for sharing that with us. It's you can definitely see how your job gets complicated. Ecosystems are such complex places. It's one thing when you're in the forest and you can see and count, but in the ocean, it definitely makes things a lot trickier. So thanks for sharing some of the tools that you use to do that job. And thanks for doing what you're doing, because it's really important that we do have those fish species going forward. So you've got a tricky job and an important job. All right. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm ready to meet some classrooms. If there are any classrooms who are tuning in live via YouTube, there's a YouTube chat sidebar on the right, and you can send in some questions there. Let us know where you're watching from. But let's meet our first live classroom, and let's start taking some questions. So let's start off in Thunder Bay, Ontario, with Mrs. Shaughnessy. We have a grade 6 classroom. Let me turn their microphone on. How are we doing, grade 6s?
Hey! Okay.
Hello, my name is Maria, and I was just wondering, why did you want to become a marine biologist? Like, I know you were talking about how your dad was a teacher, but what really inspired you to become a marine biologist?
Hi, Maria. Thanks for your question. So yeah, as I said, when I was little, my dad, I think, really cultivated my interest in fish. But when I went to university, like when I was in high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew that I cared about the environment. I knew that I liked animals, and I knew that I liked science. So I went to university thinking maybe I'll do something in environmental biology, you know, with animals, or environmental chemistry. And what really helped me was I was in what's called cooperative education. So that means in the summer after school, I got a job, and I ended up getting a job with Fisheries and Oceans Canada. Right. So it was really that I got the opportunity to work with some fishery scientists, because I didn't really know what people in Fisheries and Oceans Canada did. You know, I knew that I liked animals. I knew I liked the ocean. Right. And so it was the opportunity to actually, you know, do some work with these people and see what their jobs were like. And I had other jobs. I had a job where I used to do pest management for fields. So I would go into potato fields and cranberry fields, and I would look for insects in those fields. And we would do experiments on things like different ways to help farmers control insects in the field. It was interesting, but it wasn't the right job for me. I had jobs where I worked in a laboratory, and we did experiments on fish hearts. You know, and, you know, that was interesting, but I realized that was kind of clumsy. I didn't have the good hands to be a surgeon, and that wasn't the right job for me. So it was more that I had, sorry. I would say it's more that I had a lot of different experiences, and from that, I really learned what I liked and I didn't like.
All right, well, that's a great question to start us off. We're going to jump to another classroom this time. We're going to go to Stavely, Alberta. We've got some grade 5 and 6s joining us with Mrs. Guyton. Let me turn their microphone on. How are we doing, 5, 6s? All right, we got a nice Canada flag there. Who's got a question?
Besides the underwater cameras and such like that, and the Longline, what other kind of tools did you use?
Ooh.
Did you catch that, Shannon? They're wondering.
Could you repeat it?
Yep, we saw the long line, we saw the underwater cameras. Are there more tools that you use?
Oh, for sure. So you saw the video of the trawl net. So you do some different types of fishing. So there's a long line, there's trawl nets. I showed you the underwater camera as an example. There's diving surveys. We have beach surveys for different say like clams on the beach. There's also a tool called hydroacoustics. So hydro meaning water, acoustics meaning sound, right? And that's basically where we use sound to that we shoot in the ocean and it bounces back and it gives us a picture of what's happening underwater. So for example, Atlantic cod and some species out on the Grand Banks in Newfoundland, the surveys are done with hydroacoustics. Pacific hake is done that way. But I didn't have a picture of that one to show you.
All right, so lots of different ways to count the fish. All right, great question. Let's go to Renfrew, Ontario this time with some grade 7s with Mrs. Welch. Let me turn their microphone on. How are we doing, grade 7s?
They're all a little shy.
That's okay. Does someone have a question?
You have one question, yes. Just a second. Get in the camera so she can see you. Duck down.
How many different places have you been to explore the water?
Oh, good question. So in terms of places where I've been on ships, I've been up and down the coast in BC. And I've been out on what's called the Grand Banks in Newfoundland and up to Labrador. So I've been on actually a lot of the waterways, I guess, in Canada, except I haven't been to the Arctic. But one of the other cool things about being a scientist is that we get to travel to present our work and talk about our work with other scientists. So because scientists all over the world are sharing what we're learning and sharing the tools that we're doing. So I've been to China to do that. I've been to Poland, different places in the world where I've just gone to like talk about my research and meet other researchers and hear what they're doing at an international conference.
All right. Well, a great perk to science, especially if you're working in the field, is you do get to visit some pretty neat places, and conferences sound like another great spot where you can meet other scientists and interact and share your knowledge. We're going to meet another classroom now. This time we'll go to Orangeville, Ontario. We have a group with Mrs. Penfold, and it looks like it's a mixture of students, possibly from grade 5 to 8. Let me turn their microphone on.
What's the rarest fish you've ever caught?
The rarest? Oh my goodness. So that's a good question, because there's a question of if it's rare to me because I've only seen it once, or if it's actually rare in the ocean. I think one of the coolest things that I've gotten to see are what are called Sixgill Sharks here in British Columbia, because sometimes we accidentally catch them on the longline when we're doing research, because they really like to eat the spiny dogfish. So the little shark that you saw in the video. So they'll sometimes come and eat the dogfish that are caught on the hooks. And so then they'll end up getting hooked and we'll get to see them up at the surface. And I think that's the only way I would ever see like one of those sharks. And then I guess the other ones that have been really cool and rare for me are some of the deep water species that we've caught sometimes in the Atlantic. So like giant bright red shrimp that are like as big as your hand. So that was really exciting for me too, because I'd never seen that before.
All right, and another group joining us live. We've got some grade 11 students in San Antonio, Texas, who are tuning in with us today. They're in environmental science class. All right, who's got a question?
Oh, my name's Isabel. My question is, what's the most interesting thing like at your job that you do?
The most interesting thing that I do?
Yep.
Okay. It's a good question. I don't know, like there's a lot of different interesting things. I think that's one of the important things for me is that I get to do so many different things, because if I was just doing the same thing all the time, I think I would get really bored at my job. I mean, but it's always really exciting to go out in the field because, you know, if I spend like most of my year in this office at my desk, it's really exciting to get to go out and to be on the water, see and handle the fish, and just, you know, actually be out in the wilderness, because we're living on these boats. And so they go a lot of places where there's not even a community there, right? So there's a lot of small community on the spaces and anchor in a bay that they're in, right? And so sometimes I've had the opportunity to see, you know, bioluminescent squid in the water, or just getting out to like explore the ocean is a really great part of the job.
All right, we've got a couple questions that came in online via the YouTube chat sidebar. One from Ottawa asking about the biggest fish you ever caught, and then another from Kansas City, Missouri, and they're wondering, what can people do in an inland area to protect our oceans?
Oh, okay, great. The biggest fish that we ever caught. So since sharks are fish, it's going to be probably one of those 6 gills, right? Because there can be, it seemed like a few meters long. Yeah, so I think that's the biggest one. I mean, we've definitely caught some Pacific halibut, for example, that might be, you know, 5 feet or something like that, because with a long line, we're staying down on the bottom of the ocean, sometimes in some deep depths. And so you tend to see bigger fish at deeper depths for some species. In terms of things that you can do in an inland area. So of course, there's always inland fisheries in lakes and rivers. Fisheries and Oceans Canada doesn't work with freshwater fish for the most part. But you know, I always tell people like one of the best things that you can do is like informing yourself about issues that are going on, because you have choices as a consumer, somebody who's buying things. So you can make choices to buy fish from places that, you know, maybe you want to support like a small community fishery. So here in BC, we have things called, you know, where you can buy directly from like a small fisherman at a dock or in a program online. There's lots of programs like Ocean Wise. I think the Monterey Bay Aquarium has a program, which I'm trying to remember the name of. But there's different programs run by a lot of aquariums that give certifications to different fisheries to tell you that this fishery is sustainably managed, the fish are in pretty good shape. So you can make choices about the type of fish that you eat and the products that you buy. And one of the biggest things right now is about plastics in the ocean, I think. So you can make choices about, you know, using plastic, reducing how much plastic you have in your life. You know, there are things that you can put in the washing machine to try to make sure that some of these really small plastics that are in our clothes don't end up in the ocean. So there's lots of things that we can do.
All right. So your stomach can be an important conservation tool if you're making good decisions about what to put into it. All right. Excellent. So we've got about 5 minutes left. So I'm going to open it up. If you're in a classroom and you want us to visit with another question, give me a wave at the camera, and that'll be my cue to come visit your camera. So let's see. Oh, I see lots of waving in Thunder Bay. So let's start there. Whoops. There we go. Go ahead.
Come on up, Chase. What is the deepest depth that your long line or net has gone?
Oh my goodness. I actually don't remember. I know with like the long line, because we're trying to catch a specific type of rockfish, and they are mainly found to a certain, maybe like 200 meters. So our fishing is only going between 40 meters in the ocean and 100 meters. But it seriously depends on which fish you're trying to get information about. I mean, there's rockfish that you could go snorkeling in the ocean and see, and there's rockfish that are at like really, really deep depths down the shelf, right? And yeah, so for me lately, I've been working in what's called inshore, and so we're not working as deep as some of the other people. All
right, and Mrs. Sullivan's group had sent us a message via the chat. They were wondering what university you got your doctorate from, and Shannon did type a message back. So just in case you didn't see it, it was the University of British Columbia. Who should we visit next? Is there another question out there? Oh, there we go. Lots of waving Alberta. So we better go and visit Alberta. So your microphone is on. Can you come a little closer and a little louder for us?
Where did you grow up as a kid? Did you catch that? I want to know where you grew up when you were a kid. Noted.
Are you getting that, Shannon? Sorry.
I'm not. Could you repeat it for me again?
He's wondering where you grew up as a kid.
Oh, yeah, sure. So I grew up in Abbotsford, British Columbia, which is about an hour drive east of Vancouver. So I grew up in the Fraser Valley. My grandparents had a dairy farm. And yeah, so for me, the fish that I was most exposed to were salmon, because salmon travel a long distance up rivers to lay eggs, right? So I would say that, you know, I could drive to the ocean in an hour, but I came from more of an inland community.
All right, great question. Who should we visit next? Do we have another question out there? Let's see. All right, let's go back to Mrs. Welch's class. That might be our last question for today. Let's see.
What's the smallest fish you've ever caught?
Oh, so the size is going to depend on what type of gear we're using, right? So when we use something like a bottom trawl, it depends on how big the holes are, right, in the net. So these multi-species survey, they often use a liner to make the mesh a little bit smaller. So we've caught flatfish. I remember this because I had to take the otoliths out of a flatfish. So here's my hand. That was like about this big. Right. So imagine that, right? That's going to be probably just, less than a year old, newly born flatfish. So we can catch some pretty small things, which is different than the fishery, right? Because usually the fishery are trying to catch fish that are marketable and that, are big enough to eat, and we're not catching them before they've grown enough. But in surveys, we catch for research, we tend to catch a wider range of sizes because we're really interested in knowing what's out there and what's coming, and understanding about both young and old fish.
All right. Well, first of all, classrooms, thank you so much for joining us today. As always, your questions were great. So thank you so much. And Shannon, a huge thank you to you for taking your work, making it accessible to us, and then spending some time to answer some questions about it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, we look forward to hopefully hosting you again in the future. Are you in the office for the next little while, or do you get back out in the field soon?
I'm in the office for a little bit. We're working on assessing Northern Abalone right now. So there's no survey again for us until April.
All right. Excellent. Well, again, thank you so much. I'm going to turn the microphones on. We'll let the classrooms get loud for a minute, say goodbye and thank you, and then we'll sign off for today. So here we go, boys and girls. Microphones are coming on. All right, thanks so much for hanging out with us today. We have lots more events coming up this week and a whole bunch more ocean plastic events coming next week. So we hope we see you guys again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.